Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, and this is another edition of the MSP Initiative Live. A couple of housekeeping items. Before we get started, if you've been following these podcasts, you know that we're about to hit the road again. And just a reminder that the Channel Strong Tour is coming to Texas, Louisiana, Florida, and Georgia starting Monday, and we're going all the way through to the Friday after. So if you are in any of those areas or within driving distance and would love to either come out for lunch or join us in the evening for some sandwiches, beers, and company, definitely request an invite at the mspinitiative.com. You see there's options for Lunch and Learns and Channel Strong, and we would love to see you. Also, we do monthly giveaways with a bunch of our vendor partners. Totally free to you. There's, I think, 12 or 13 giveaways scheduled for this month. Costs you absolutely nothing, but you got to enter to win. So feel free to hit mspinitiative.com, go to giveaway, sign up, and maybe you will win. You have 13 chances. All right, very good. Well, now that those are out of the way, I would like to introduce to you our special guest of the day. And I'm going to have him kind of give us his background and tell us a little bit about him and his company in a second. But welcome, Mr. Josh Lieberman. How are you doing, sir?
I'm unmuted and good, George. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Like we're at 70-degree temperatures here in Philadelphia area today. So
wow, 60s here, but that's not as much of a surprise.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I'm not gonna lie. It's like t-shirt kind of and jeans weather, and it's been a while since we've had that. So that's definitely. Oh, there you go. Already our first question of the day. Brent says, "Wow, the infamous Josh Lieberman. How is New Mexico?"
We're doing fine out here. Okay, well, who is that?
That was Brent Fairbanks from California.
Oh yeah. Okay. Hey, Brent. Haven't seen you in a couple of years.
Yeah, right
All's
on.
well,
So,
actually.
Awesome. Well, for anyone that doesn't know you, Josh, and you've been around in the circles for quite some time, but there's a lot of people out there, and the internet is a big place. Why don't you just give us a quick background about yourself and how you got into the IT space, and a little bit about your company, and then we'll get into the kind of main topic of the day.
Well, I'm going to limit myself to 90 seconds on this because I'm a very interesting topic, and I have to be careful. At least to me. So I've been in IT for 40 years, but I kind of stumbled in while I was working in Bakersfield, California for a year. I lost a job before it started and I needed to do something. I was doing manpower work all summer into the fall, and I could either go out and work inside another pool, painting it in the sun, or I could work inside where there were women in air conditioning. And I noticed that there was a PC being unpacked. I told them I knew how to do that. And I'm going to jump ahead to 1990 when I started PC Services, which was a side living until 95, which became Net Sciences. We've been full-time since, and we are an IT security / MSP, I'm sorry, but I put security first because we have to, and it's what we do, and it's been my focus the whole last 15 years. We are a small business, just 4 people, just roughly. I'd say we're about the 10th largest, even at that size in our state. And we service mostly small business because that's what there is here. 98% of the state is under 20 users and 99% under 100. So it's very small businesses here. That's it. We're an MSP. We were an integrator. We still do that as well. But we've really been, I think last year, 66% of our money came from MSP related services.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's good to know. So just to be super duper duper clear, a typical size customer is what for you?
Well, I'll tell you that I think the actual median size is 28 seats, but that distorts it because I have a 105 user site. I have a 2-user site. I have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, but I'd say typical is in that 10 to 25 seat range. That's probably typical for many people on the call.
Okay. All right. So that gives us a little bit more context, I think, in what we're about to go into. And for anyone else that doesn't know, I think you're heavily affiliated with a couple of different groups. Would you like to share that ahead of time?
Sure. I'm I guess, a business lifetime long ASCII member. I joined in 96. And I've been to more than 100 of their events. I have a sideline doing photography. Uh, that's Colorado. But I do travel stuff, and I also do shows and events. And I work for them and many others. I'm in the Channel Pro community and speak for them. Member of Everything MSP. And I also have spoken at SB Tech Fest and too many others, many others over the last 5 or 10 years.
So you frequent the circuit once it's back online, and hopefully that'll be sometime before the end of the year, because I'm sure we're all looking to safely get back into the jam. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
yes, thank you. Very great photographer, by the way. So topic for today, guys, and I know this isn't a vendor presenting, by the way, and even though when they are, we're just having a conversation. This is an MSP who's decided to figure out what fits his size customer and make it work. So with that being said, the title for today's topic is Insecure is Not an Option. This is true. Security First MSP 2021 edition. So we're going to unpack that and figure out, number one, at the size that Josh is working in, what fits, what should be in, what should be out, what's the math look like, and how do they bundle this together? So it's important to understand all of that going into this, because Josh is presenting from his side of the world, right, with his particular client base and his size. So we want to pick his brain and understand what he believes is security first, and then we're going to understand how he packages those things after we discuss that, and then we'll get into, I'm sure, plenty of stories, and Josh is always good for those. So Josh, let's start with 2021 edition, right? You've had a chance to get up to date over, I'm sure, 2020, when you were stuck behind a computer screen, not going a lot of places, with all the new offerings, all the new line items, right? Before, like when we talk security, and we're going back probably into the 2000s, 2010s, right? Antivirus, maybe DNS, maybe malware, a secondary malware, and a UTM, and that was it, right? That was security, but that's not what it is now. So I would love to unpack from your position what's included now in the conversation. What are the line items? What are the categories that now cover 2021's security first conversation?
Thanks, George. Sure. So the first thing I would say is that one of the things that changed for us in 2020 is that we used to offer various levels of security packages, bundles at each level, but we had 3 levels, just like we had 3 levels in managed services. And at some point early in 2020, I decided, and by March anyway, that we simply couldn't cut any corners that way. And our highest level offering is now our lowest level offering. There's one bundle. It's about 10 services, and I'll probably run through most of them when we talk, but that's it. There are add-ons that some sites need on top of that for compliance or other stuff, but the bottom line is that everybody gets pretty near everything. We just don't cut any corners, and that's tricky. I'm lucky that we had raised prices at the beginning of 2020. Cost us a few seats, but I didn't have to do much to support that stack. We did add to it. We added remote access. Do you want me to mention or not mention vendor name?
No, you can
Okay.
mention
Okay.
whoever and whatever. Yeah.
We work with TrueGrid for remote access, and they're a proxied RDS service. And even during the growth phase, the March through May crazy stuff, they were very good. And it's been a really great service. We went from having no unmanaged endpoints, even the remote users or even the business owners that traveled, all of them carried portables that we managed, secured, encrypted. We went from there to having maybe 80 endpoints that we've never seen. And that was fast and scary. And I do know for a fact that the very first one was a CEO who had a 14-year-old desktop that somebody had upgraded from XP to 7 to Windows 10. Now, I'm hoping that's the worst case, but they were messy. So what we did right away to respond to the pressure and the need for remote connectivity was to implement proxied RDS as opposed to SSL VPN connectivity, which can be done securely.
Or some other third party, like a LogMeIn or a
or HTTPS solutions. Yeah, we went to the proxied RDS solution, and we armored those endpoints that were receiving the remote connections a little more. We armored up a little more, and we added to Cylance, InfoSight, and then connected them to a SOC at the back end through Solutions Granted.
Okay, so
And-
let's be clear for a second, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So like,
Yeah.
there is a bunch of antivirus guys that have been around the circle for a long time. There's ESET, there's Viper, there's WebRoot, there's Symantec, whatever their version is these days. There's McAfee, there's and a bunch of other guys that fit in that realm, right? Bitdefender's out there, right? Those are just the ones that are coming to the top of my head. Cylance is kind of considered an enterprise version of that, right? Like it's not in the same category. You know, I
Yeah.
would say like Cylance. Who else would be in that category? SentinelOne.
SentinelOne, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, others. They're in that new category that people at first were just calling behavioral heuristic clients or non-signature based clients, but they've kind of since become EDR clients, endpoint detection and response clients, because they also have components that do after the fact threat hunting. And then you have players who do just that, such as Huntress, just the after the fact threat hunting. And that's a whole other thing.
So when you adopted Cylance, did you displace another guy, or are you doing that in addition to?
We displaced the existing client, which was a Bitdefender client for us, and even in my own home, I still use Bitdefender, and I still find it to be one of the best packages of the signature-based products. And all of the signature-based products developed some heuristic practice or elements to their products, but Cylance is in that upper tier that people like Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, and certainly SentinelOne are
So
in.
do you mind if I ask you, are you buying that directly or through distribution?
Through Solutions Granted.
Okay.
They're a group out of Virginia, I believe, and they provide not only the products and many others, but also the SOC to back it up. Our service includes the ability for them to respond 24/7 to incidents on endpoints and even lock that endpoint traffic down to a tunnel between them and the endpoint until it's remediated. So because we couldn't get to the home computers easily early on, and because we knew that if we did any work on them, we would own every problem they've ever had, we decided to armor their targets, their endpoints inside the walls of the office that we're now being remotely connected to. So the proxied RDS helps, and the extra armoring. We threw that stuff out there for free, and we were able to absorb that. I'm actually still doing it for free. I'm hoping that will change late in the year. But you know, the bottom line is, because we just had a price increase, and I was able to negotiate really, really good deals from everybody. I got to say, everybody reached out and helped. All the vendors I touched.
Okay, so proxied RDS as your secure remote access solution, your kind of enterprise version of an antivirus plus, right? You know, to displace it. Let's talk about the SOC side for a second. Like, there's a lot. It's been like 4 or 5 years ago, it kind of started to trickle down, right, from upstairs from the enterprise tier, and it was so expensive, you couldn't even start the conversation. It started like $4 or $5 grand a month, and it's like, whoa, per customer, that's not going to fly. Maybe my largest customers could potentially consider that, but the majority of the rest surely won't. Obviously, things have changed. There's a lot more players in that space, especially in MSP sandbox land. How does this work now? Is it per endpoint? Are there different levels of the SOC? Is it all the same? What are they responsible for, and what are you responsible for?
So the answer is not quite all the above, but certainly first two. The biggest problem now is choice. There are so many different SOCs out there. Some of them offer really end-to-end solutions like SOC Soda, who even offer things like their own endpoint protection. And then of them are really focused, like Dark Cube that we work with is just firewall log and response. I mentioned them in a bit and go into more detail, but you have to decide how to fit these together. In our place, we actually work, in our instance, we actually work with 3 different SOCs. One is just at the endpoint, and that's the Solutions Granted folks that are managing those endpoints. Now, that's not all they do, it's all we're doing with them at the moment. The other SOC is the firewall log reading group. And in that group are also other players like Vigilan, whom we've worked with in the past. And Vigilan will do far more. They'll read logs from any endpoint, switch, router, firewall, and they offer some very competitive services. At the time we moved to Darkcube, they didn't have an instant response thing. So Darkcube works with the bigger firewall vendors like SonicWall, and I believe Sophos and Fortinet and others, and they'll push out block lists. So if there's an advanced persistent threat, they'll block that on a list, and that list now gets uploaded hourly. It becomes part of the botnet list. So as long as you have botnet blocking turned on your firewall, this gets added to the known list, and it just automatically happens. You get an alert, you get a ticket, but it just happens, which is a lot better than waking somebody up in the middle of the night.
Crowdsourcing security almost.
Well, we are, yeah. I mean, if you're talking SOC, unless you're talking about, you know, two of them and you got them at a trade show, if you're talking SOC, you are talking about outsourced security. But so that's one level of SOC, handling the firewall logs for us. Another one is the folks from the solution granted. And then the third level of SOC is the people who do the log reading and things like servers and desktops. We have a mix right now because I brought in different players at different times with different expertises. I'm hoping by the end of the year to rationalize this and be down to 1 or 2 SOCs, not the 3 or even 4 that we sometimes deal with now. But it's complicated like everything else. And you have to be careful because anybody you're working with might get bought by Kaseya or Datto or somebody else next week. And that's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good, but your relationship may change, not to mention your pricing and terms. Sure. So yeah, a whole nother discussion.
Pricing in terms obviously is a big conversation. So, so is it safe to say that all of your managed customers and all of the devices that come along with that are now tied into some sort of SOC service?
Yes, it's safe to say. I don't believe we have a single seat. No, we don't. All of our customers, I hear people say this a lot, that they're a pure play MSP. Mm-hmm. I did it the hard way. I did this in 2010 and basically lost 60% of my seats overnight. And although only about 40% of our income and about 20% of our profit, but 60% of our seats went away. Since then, I've rebuilt to the point where until the beginning of 2020, we hardly ever lost anybody. And we finally finished migrating everybody at 2019's end into fully managed services. So we don't have an unmanaged seat. We just still do projects. I mean, it was a struggle. Carl Palachuk has a book, Managed Services in a Month. I've renamed it to Managed Services in a Decade. But anyway, we're there. And it was a struggle, and it remains a struggle to bring new people into that paradigm. But we're there and we're staying there.
Okay, so let me slice that last comment into 2 questions. First question. Clearly, it took you a long time to convince, like basically, you know, crap or get off the pot is the term, but like it took you a long time for your customers to get to the conclusion, or for you to get to the conclusion, hey, I either need you to come in all in, or I need you to exit stage left. Like, how did that conversation go?
So I never quite had that. When I say I lost 60% of my seats, I lost companies because they weren't going to pay $250 a month to have any ongoing services. So I should carefully state, I lost no good clients. I just discovered how few good clients I had. Yes. We've always had 3 levels of managed services, which I have cleverly named Silver, Gold, and Platinum. Although I admit I had better, more descriptive names that nobody understood. I gave up when I went to the Marriott thing. But our silver level doesn't include help desk or what most people consider flat rate IT. We use that as the gateway drug for a lot of our sites to move them into a managed solution. And I will still use it now to bring a really messy site into the fold. They get the full security suite. We have full connectivity. We can do all our remote support, but we spend sometimes 3, 6, or even 9 months replacing or remediating these things.
Yeah.
That's how we get them in. Now, SilverCare at this point, I haven't sold out to somebody in 1.5 or 2 years, which is great. The last remaining site on SilverCare is a co-managed IT site. And I have actually an ex-employee who runs their IT. They're right up the street. It's still a great relationship. And I think they have a $6,000 or $8,000 a month bill because they're a big site, but there's no risk. I haven't extended any flat rate anything. It's all just automated services and Datto and SonicWall stuff.
That was going to be my second question. So for perspective customers, when you're in front of them, you've taken a look at their stuff, you've tried to figure out where they're at. In our pre-call to this schedule, you said that you have basically like a checklist, right? Trying to figure out almost like where they're at on the, Lieberman maturity scale. It's probably the best way for me to say it, right? And so there's a numerical value that you generate from the checklist. And you were saying out of all of the people that prospectively talk to see if they'll fit what you're doing, the majority of them come in at what score on your 12-point score chart?
Well, by the way, it's Liberman, but I wouldn't call it Liberman maturity, because if you check with my wife, that those words don't go together. But let's just we'll call it the Net Sciences Checklist.
Okay.
The 12-step program to a more secure you. So the a typical site I see comes in between 4 and 6. And I don't want to go through the whole checklist, but it has things you would expect, like UTM firewall, BCDR solution with offsite data, DNS filtering at the slightly more arcane end, EDR, or at least a managed AV solution, automated patching and reporting, pretty much the basics we all know about. But towards the high end are things like firewall log reading and response, internal vulnerability scanning. And actually, if you want to turn it up to 13, the one thing we've never encountered anywhere are response plans, incident awareness and response plans, or even a disaster recovery plan. Nothing. But a typical site does come in between, if they've got IT management, we've seen 8s. Typically, we see 6s. Frequently, we see 4s. And unfortunately, I've just done 4 in a row, 1s or 0s. I walked away from the site, we picked them up, it's a rarity to pick up a 0, but they had a 10-year-old server, no firewall, no patching, no AV, no management, and obviously no anything else on the list. Most of those sites are the kind of sites that we get our parking validated and we leave, but this guy actually wants to change that. And he's buying everything from scratch and starting over. The good news is, it's 10-year-old equipment. He's not losing any depreciation benefit there.
That is right.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really hard to say what's typical, but it's rare to see somebody score above a 6, partly because there's arcane stuff in there. I mean, realistically, nobody has internal vulnerability scanning or firewall log reading and response or comprehensive backup and log reading at the Office 365 level. We've never met somebody that has those. So those are the 9 or 10, 11, and 12 there. But the first 9 are things that everybody everywhere should see and have. They just don't.
Okay, so number one, the checklist is great because that helps change and simplify the conversation with the check signer, right? That you're talking to. How often, where does security start in the beginning of the very first piece of the conversation? Are you coming back with that after you've done the analysis, and do they even understand what we're talking about?
So first of all, I use the phrase security first a lot, and therefore I do lead with security, and we do talk about that. I sit down and the first thing I ask every client is, why am I here? Then once they've expressed why they've reached out to us, I ask them what they do. And then I say, well, here's how we look at things through a security lens first, and let's actually do a little bit of an overview. The first meeting, and almost all of the time, the only meeting, is there are no tools. I don't run, I was a rapid fire tools fan, but I finally got to the point where I really didn't want to be quite that intrusive. Now that product doesn't require installation, and I'm not saying that, but it generates so much data that, to your question about do they understand things, rarely. I mean, it is common for us to go somewhere and find people who don't know how many users or PCs they have. It's not uncommon for them to have trouble finding their server. And it's not because it's in the cloud. They pay no attention to this stuff. And it's not rare for me to run into IT guys who don't know what DNS filtering is, or subnet is, or permissions. They're just somebody who worked the drill press before, or was a draftsman, or is an accountant, and now they're in charge of IT. So I need to couch this because I don't know if this is the same around the country, maybe not, but in New Mexico, 2/3 of the sites we walk into have never had professional IT support before.
Wow.
So, that's not to say they've never had support. They've got somebody's nephew, another buddy's cousin, or the son of the owner, which was a couple of weeks ago, and they know nothing except how to clear a paper jam or do things cheap. So that is where you walk into. And in those cases, no, there aren't people there that understand our discussion. And during the exposition, before I get there to discovery, I discover what level the folks are at in terms of IT maturity, let's call it, or knowledge, but more importantly, business. I also walk into sites where they don't have a regular CPA. They don't have a regular attorney. So they're running hobbies. Sometimes these hobbies grow recklessly. Last week, it was a $4 million hobbyist. He didn't have an attorney. He didn't have, he had an accountant, kind of. He had
What kind of company was that?
Manufacturing. I don't want to get more specific. But yeah, look, George, I had my largest ever site that I walked into was many years ago, over a decade ago. They were $60 million business and they had never had IT support. And you got to say, how does this happen? They were a construction company. They caught the boom. They grew like crazy and they just thrashed. And the stuff we saw there was the stuff of Facebook posts. It was really funny stuff. All of this boils down to the original question, though, is really when we meet people, I discover where they're at in terms of business maturity and where they're at in terms of IT knowledge, and I tailor the entire discussion based on that, but I lead with security.
Okay. JP says, this is a smart man. I agree. And Brent says, construction was my guess. We're going to send you.
Yeah.
All right. So it's very interesting, Josh. I just want to be very specific. You said what's the percentage of prospects that you are running into on a regular basis that have never dealt with an MSP before you walked in the door?
Well, 67% roughly. It's not exact, but about 2/3. I did keep track of this from 2010 to 2020. And for some reason, I thought I didn't have to do it anymore. But at that point, it was 70% exactly. Now, I misrepresented something. I said when we walk in the door, when we receive the phone call or receive the email that leads to the contact, that's the percentage. A lot of these people we never meet because they have no idea that it might cost $1,000 or $1,500 a month for 10-user network to be managed. Actually, we have 5-user networks that spend $1,500, depending on what they need. So it really comes down to whether they're open to the concept that people spend money on IT. And I would say that roughly half those calls or more, we never have to visit specifically for that reason. They're just not going to get there. Yeah.
This is I asked this question because a week and a half ago, I'm sure you saw the headline, an MSP out of New York called Electric, who's heavily into software development around orchestration and automation, got $40 million funding raise. And in their press release, it said in 2020, 70% of their new clients had never interacted with an IT or MSP service provider prior to them signing on board with them, which I swore, I mean, listen, we hear it all the time from I call them the talking heads of the industry. They're like, if they need an MSP, they already have one by now. And I'm like, I'm not sure I agree with that. And your numbers seem to match.
Absolutely not. I've worked in 4 or 5 states in the Southwest and California, and I know people, so many in the industry. I probably know people that work in this field in over 40 states. It's more common in rural areas to run into this, and Albuquerque is probably the biggest town you'll ever enjoy. It's a town of 600,000 people in a valley of 900,000 people, but it's really like a small town that way. And what I've noticed is that the most or least densely populated states, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, New Mexico, haven't been to Alaska, but those states also have the smallest business sizes, the demographics I talked about, and they tend to have the least business maturity. So they don't really get it. I mean, truly, I meet people all the time by phone or Zoom or occasionally in person, that have never thought about the concept of having a professional IT firm. They don't even know it's a thing. It's,
Hmm.
yeah, it's 2021 and they don't know that's a thing. And I'm not talking MSP yet. I'm just talking about IT services.
Yeah,
Uh,
somebody's Googling, network help, IT support, something.
yeah, yeah. The one thing I make sure we don't show up on is apparently the most common term in my market, which is cheap IT support. We kind of have control for the word cheap, but that's the #1 search. I don't know about the rest of the country. Yeah, I mean, it's just, we don't have any cheap. We've never had any cheap. We're not ordering in any cheap, and we really can't cheap anymore. So,
Okay.
yeah,
No, this is it was worth mentioning because once again we're finding the talking heads may not be talking facts, right? We're hearing from people out on the street that it's reversed.
you
So
know,
there's a lot of business out there.
yeah, it's weird. And also you have to be careful whose numbers. If you do some research after this call, you take half an hour, you'll find numbers between 22%, because I did this research last year, and I'm guessing 35% of companies are fully engaged with MSPs. And then you'll find people who claim that 2/3 of all businesses already have an MSP. You referred to that. I, and here I would guess 20% deal with an MSP, but that's an inflated number because many of, actually all of the MSPs I know, they're much bigger business. They have lots of non-MSP clients. So just because they're dealing with an MSP, I mean, if you're dealing with a tennis pro, but you're trying to figure out how to cook, yes, you've got a tennis pro, but you're trying to get them to teach you to cook. It's not the same thing. So I would guess that maybe a quarter of America is engaged as businesses with MSPs. And I'm thinking of small business, even setting the bar high to 400 or 500 seats, maybe a quarter of America is engaged with an MSP.
At least 75% of available options. So that's very intriguing to me. All right, so let's go back to we got a quick question that popped in, so I'm going to see. Brent says, even very large organizations with their support don't seem to understand what is available today. My opinion is from the wife who works at a large organization, Panasonic, don't say.
Yeah, well, co-managed people in markets with larger businesses where co-managed is the thing, you'll discover, at least I've discovered, that a lot of those companies, they would dismiss the concept of outsourcing anything out of hand because they have their own employee. I know a guy who supports 250 endpoints across 7 locations alone. He's in his mid-20s and he has literally already had a stroke. He's so overwhelmed, and the kid is brilliant and incredibly capable. And all we did was security stuff for him. And every time we reach out, his management says, no, we're never going to outsource IT. We have you. He is brilliant. He's driven. He's very capable, and they're burning him out.
Well, this kind of comes back to the beginning of this, which is, hey, what's included in all these line items that are now considered security first, where before they were not part of this normal bundle. But to your point, right, like there's only so many hours in the day, and you could be the heaviest scripting RMM automation guru on the planet. I mean, there's just one, if it's just one person versus 100, 150, 200, however many people it is behind them. And we've seen MSPs that are oversubscribed to the hilt, right? One engineer to every 800 or 900 or 1,000 endpoints, which is just a mind-boggling number. Without the tools, without the automation, it's impossible. And when it comes to the security conversation, I mean, I just don't think it's cost effective for SMB, and I quantify or qualify SMB as sub 250 employees. I know everybody has a different term. That's my opinion. Sub 200 employees, it doesn't pay. You don't have the time or the money or the resources to even want to build your own SOC or build your own monitoring solution or build your own remediation solution. Like, that's why we have to look elsewhere, right?
Well, it's even simpler than that. And it really comes down to a very basic concept. The people with their heads down doing the day-to-day work are not the same people that necessarily have the skills and surely don't have the time to become strategic in the industry. So they don't even know what they don't even know. They have no idea what the tools are, what the threats are, what the vectors of penetration are, or what the defenses and responses should be. So they can't. I mean, I have one guy who's the only support for 105 seats. He used to work for me. He's really good, but he can't know all this. They won't send him away to a conference, much less 20 in a year, which some of us do. He can't read, or if he does have time, he's not going to read IT at night, right? He's not going to read about the industry and about things like that. It's not his passion. His passion is, approaching retirement. But the bottom, that's not fair. His passion is maintaining excellence at his job, but his job, despite what his company thinks, is not being a well-informed IT industry professional. His job is everything from help desk to budgeting with upper management for IT. But that's scarily, that's just not going to include what we do. So even the best, and even if you've got a smart company that's got 3 people managing 100 seats, that doesn't necessarily mean one of them is capable of doing what a better MSP can do. And they don't know that. So you have to educate them. It takes a while. Yeah.
No, it's a good point. I mean, yeah, and we see burnout at the MSP level all the time, right? That the engineers are just thrown into the deep end, and there's really no science or strategy or hierarchy to the business, right? And in those cases, there's a lot of turnstiling, right? Of people coming in and out the door, churn and burn, we say. But anyway, back to the conversation of security first. So we talked about EDR, right? A higher level of antivirus and all the other stuff along with that. We talked about log collection as part of a SOC solution and what that means at the endpoint level, at the firewall level, at the networking level. What else are we missing?
All right, I'm going to run through this with about 1 minute per item, and then
Go ahead.
If you want, we'll go deeper into
Rapid
things.
fire, yeah.
So here's our brand names: Active Endpoint Protection, right? We talked about it. EDR with a SOC. Active Firewall Response. We talked about firewall log reading and the ability to do blocking real time. Device encryption and secure remote access. I've only put that together because TrueGrid does both for us. We talked about proxy to RDS, but we also encrypt all portable devices. And as of yet, about 1/3 of our fixed desktops, it's all BitLocker, because finally Windows 10 Pro, as opposed to Windows 7 Pro, includes BitLocker. So it's there, it should be used. We go ahead and turn that on, but we use the TrueGrid products to manage things like key escrow, or alert us if there's a missing, the machine gets unencrypted for some reason, or one comes in that we don't know about. We'll talk about that in a minute. And by the way, the TrueGrid solution for remote access also logs the time of connection and the IP address it comes in from. And we're working them to improve that even better with geofencing and other things. DNS filtering, everybody probably does that, but we work with DNS Filter just because I like their price model and the performance of their product and the fact that I can talk to people there, I know them. We, of course, do everything the RMM does. There's managed patching and network monitoring and alerting. That's not really a selling point, but it sits under everything else. For multi-factor authentication, this is the one thing we do that we get the most kickback on. I'm not going to talk about DPI SSL and the firewall, whole nother discussion, but multi-factor authentication, people hate this. They hate having to make that effort. Even the push, TrueGrid has push MFA on remote access integrated. Even that they complain about. Or they call up and they say, well, this thing on my phone, it's like, you've done this 20 times for 6 months. Yes, you have to push, you have to press the button. So it's funny, we get a lot of kickback. We don't yet have comprehensive 2FA or MFA on everything, but we're going to get there pretty soon. I hope this quarter or next quarter through Duo in our case. User training. Let's pretend that people care. We offer this. We are engaged with ID Agent at the moment. We've had user training from one vendor or another for 7 years, but I've never seen less engagement. That's frustrating. We never saw 45%. I think 43 was our high point, and I think we're in the 20s or below now. I don't know how to re-engage people who are working on it, but it's out there. I'm going to tell you that we get dark web alerting because that's what ID Agent's all about. I'm also going to tell you that I've pretty much stopped sharing that information because everybody's inured to it. They don't want to hear for the 37th time that these 3 people have another data breach. Their first question and their last question is, how do you fix it? You don't. We can't fix it. All we can do is remind them endlessly to use unique credentials, at least inside the business. But anyway, that's in there. Vulnerability scanning. So we probably are one of the few MSPs in the small market, small size that do this, but we bring in a couple of devices or a couple of services from Nodeware and Domots. So Nodeware will scan for internal vulnerabilities such as missing patches, which most of us will catch with RMN, but it will also find deprecated protocols. And a couple of years back when SMBv1 got retired, a lot of us assumed that wasn't even on our networks. Well, it was on 4 of ours. We know because we killed it. And then those 4 sites called us because their MFPs, their copiers and scanners wouldn't work. And turns out 2 of the 4 weren't even upgradable past SMBv1. We solved it by scanning to secure FTP, but the bottom line was people keep those machines forever. Those machines were 20 years old.
Wow.
When SMBv1 was a thing. So it also will do things like tell you have default username and passwords in place, where even we got burned. Our little webcam, the cams we use around the building from Axis, the Swedish company, the MBR we patched and we all think we had to do, but we forgot there were integrated web servers in each camera and they were set up with their defaults. So admittedly, they are VLANed off and it's probably not a big risk, but what the hell? So we changed those integrated passwords. Phones do that too. I mean, most people with VoIP phones probably don't bother to change the root and the password there, and they should. It will also alert us when we get a new device on any given subnet, and that's priceless. And we also do more with IoT. I don't want to bury myself down this hole, but Domots is much more of an IoT focused solution. And one of the really nifty things for anybody that manages compliance covered places by video, any cannabis heads that is in your business out there that support the cannabis industry will discover that they're going to have to maintain video from seed to vapor. And you're going to have proof that your video system works. The ability of Domots to grab a frame every hour from every camera and collect that as proof that you have functioning video is pretty cool. And they do network mapping too. So that's our basic stack. But when you get to Office 365, we make sure that we have a very strong mail filtering solution. For me, it's Mail Protector. People have other options. I like it because I can also throw on encryption very inexpensively and very effectively through that. And I like the way their product works. We also do Cyberfish at the moment, and we're still experimenting with them, but they are our anti-phishing dedicated solution that literally follows through every link and every email to make sure it's not malicious and blocks the ones that are. We also wrap around that in, archiving and backup. So in our case, drop suite through Vault America, because that does really comprehensive backup of OneDrive and Outlook, SharePoint and Teams, which most of us know Teams is just kind of SharePoint and drag, but it runs on top of SharePoint, but it does complete, granular, multiple time a day grabs of that data that we can restore. And it's so easy that we have many clients who've restored their own messages, which blows my mind. It's so cool. And finally, and this is where we're still
messages, but they won't do the MFA. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And more. Yeah, they'll bring in their own wireless access point and stuff it under the desk, but they won't do MFA. So the last part that we're not there yet on is log reading and response for O365. I write a lot in the industry and a lot for Channel Pro, and I pointed out last year that in the beginning of the year, we're starting to treat Office 365 as its own endpoint. So much goes on there, and it's such a focus not only of business and user productivity, but of the vile malfeasance out there, because they know that that's where the money is, right? They're going to go out there and Willie Horton that place because they know that's where the money is. So we're starting to be much more serious about looking at logs and getting them read and alerted on. I'm still experimenting. Rocket Cyber had such an offering, but not as a standalone option. Scout has such an offering. To my blood, it's a little rich, a little pricey, but there are others out there. I can't even think of them right offhand, but there are people that do these. Services Soxoder will do it, amongst others. We need to develop that better, but that's our Office 365 complete plan. You plug in the version you want, whether it's, nonprofit, business standard, premium, E3, E5, we wrap these around all of those. That's it. That's our basic stack. And then where we can get away with it, it's not mandatory yet. We're looking at application whitelisting through Threat Locker. Mobile device management will probably just be my moving up stack within Microsoft and using their ESM, I think. I'm sorry, the name's changed and I forget it sometimes. Yeah. And we're just experimenting with permissions elevation or permissions management. The biggest risk most of us take is allowing users to be local admins.
Yeah.
And I'm the guy who spent, I think it took us 40 hours to get a 10-user site in 2010 to run Windows 7 and XP. They had a mix as standard users. We spent hours with every vendor. We created all kinds of special permissions. It was brutal. And then they added one piece of software and broke the whole thing. There's just so many pieces of software out there that expect local admin. It's grotesque, but it's
it's software that hasn't been updated to the current standard for sure.
Yep, or written by people who don't give a rat's ass. And honestly, that's just as common in the vertical world anyway. So permission elevation means that you can leave them as standard users and you get a console. We're looking at auto elevate right now, but there are others out there. And you get this alert that they need elevation. The downside is somebody has to respond really quick. You have to think about this. Even if you have a 1-hour SLA, that's too slow when somebody needs permission elevation to run an update or to launch a module in something. And that's what's holding me back. Right? We're not there yet, but good God, that'll be a major leap. Between that and whitelisting, you can actually secure a small business at that point, but they're both tricky. Whitelisting will probably be the noisiest thing we ever do. And I'm absolutely going to hire another tech. Before that, you mentioned that ratio, that tech ratio. Mm-hmm. I know the industry, the folks like, I'm not going to use names, but GP and others that tell you 500 to 1,000 seats of tech. That's the Comcast mentality. I believe that you can do that. I do not believe you can deliver quality support under all circumstances until there are dozens to hundreds of you in your practice as an MSP. We all have to control for worst case scenarios or we become Texas. Sorry, as a New Mexican, I had to slip that in there. But you have to realize that there will be a day once
you have a wall too, pal. Like there's a board.
Okay. Oh yeah, I was actually thinking of the storms and
okay. All right.
But that's what I'm saying is we have to call for control for worst case scenarios because all of us will have a time when your best engineer is on vacation, somebody else gets sick, there's 2 people in the field doing something, and 6 people have problems at once. It's going to happen. Or even 3 have problems at once. And if you have a 1 or a 2-hour SLA, you need to pay attention. So I look at about 200 seats per tech. And I think that we can do an extraordinary job with that. And that means that at certain times, there's 300 or 400 seats that day in front of a tech. But at other times, things are quiet. And it's a little like ice climbing here at Net Sciences. It is hours of abject boredom interspersed with moments of abject terror. So every now and again, things spin up, but it's maybe once a year. We did have one this year, but it went away. And there's still clients. I don't understand the 4, 5, 6, 800 seats per tech. To me, that's just a recipe for, if not immediate, delayed poor service delivery.
Interesting. So a couple things, and then I'm going to ask you some targeted questions. Brent comes back. Brent, I'm now reading your messages before I say them. Thank you. So he mentioned Perch is another guy out there for SOC as another option. And then he said Josh's numbers are spot on, which is
That
great.
is obviously my biggest cheerleader out there.
So does your end customer interact with your SOC vendor for any reason?
No, even the 2 co-managed, well, one of the co-managed sites is becoming a fully managed site, but even the 2 that were co-managed for the month of March, where they have an IT person or 2 at the other site, even they don't. They come through us for requests, but it's not that they can't. It's just that nobody wants to at this point. They both those sites have their own RMM consoles. Both of them have access to make changes to some of the tools, but not SOC access yet. That Scout that mentioned, I'm sorry, not of Scout, but of Perch. The thing I didn't touch on the whole back. This is one page we went through. The back is speculative stuff, and it's about, what aren't we doing now? What do we need to do, or what we'd like to do? One of the things that I haven't yet considered is one of what I call the tunnel all vendors. So the all-in-one security vendors that are route all your traffic through us. We clean the traffic, we watch the activity, and we're the SOC and remediator. So in that group would be people like Perch or Todyl, Todyl, which is a questionable, but anyway, questionable name for some. I guess there's others. Black Stratus, I think, is still in the game doing that. Or on a larger scale, the most impressive I've seen is Zscaler. We saw it at a manufacturing plant with several hundred users we did a project for last year. But they're out there, and from what I understand, they're starting to sniff the small business market. Some companies do that, and they adjust their pricing, and they build out true MSP services, and some don't. But they understand that they're looking at that. I haven't done that. We haven't chosen a one site or a tunnel all one-stop shop kind of security solution. And I don't know that we're going to, but it's certainly out there. And as Brent mentioned, Perch is amongst those. I guess they're now in the ConnectWise portfolio, but when I first met them, they were a standalone company.
Mm-hmm. So are you building escalators into your pricing agreements with your customers, or at some point you're gonna have to charge for more and more and more? How are you packaging that conversation?
Yeah, that's where you could have a whole show on that. So first of all, we have a separate MSA from statement of work, and that MSA doesn't talk pricing at all. The statement of work, which is dated by year, and with us typically gets re-signed each year. The statement of work does, and specific services and pricing, so that we have the flexibility to make changes, at least from a legal standpoint. Here's my standard cadence. We raise our prices every 2 years, but the only raise our prices at the same time we bundle more services. Okay. Now, I'm not saying we only raise them as much as the services cost. It's not true, but I guess the best way to describe that is I can easily justify a cost raise, or more easily, by saying here's some more services. But I also am careful not to sit down and say, okay, now we're going to have universal 2FA everywhere through Duo or anything like that. I don't tell them, we've now done this, that, or the other thing. I don't do that. I explain to them that we've expanded our security portfolio and it provides you the following benefits. Because nobody argues that they want to be more secure, but they might argue that they need two-factor authentication, or that they need the logs from the domain controller and every endpoint read. So we just don't get that granular. We just explain it's becoming more secure, and here are the benefits. Here's the issue, the threat we're addressing, and here's the benefits of doing so. It's hard sometimes, and we do have a couple of clients that are technical enough that they will want the details. But the bottom line is we don't negotiate that away. So let's just call 2020 year one. During year one or year two, which is 21 now, we may add services. If we put them everywhere, we don't charge for them. If they're optional, then of course we can charge. And most of the services we add are charged by the seat rather than by the site. But after 2 years, as 2022 starts, I'm going to select one or two of those offerings and roll them into that big mandatory base, and then the price goes up. And typically we raise prices $5 a seat to $10 a seat. And again, there's a lot of gurus in this industry who will tell you never lose a client by raising prices. That's an absurd statement, but you never lose a good client by raising prices.
I agree with that sentence 100%. Brent comes back. I've reread it already, Brent. Very clever. Yes, it was very clever. Very clever approach to raising the prices. So if you were to give everyone on this call and anyone who will watch it later, let's say they don't have the ability to go through, like you just read through that one page, a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
What are the top 1 or 2 things that you'd say if you don't do the rest? Absolutely add these things.
Presuming you've got a UTM firewall, I'm going to presume that, and presuming you understand the importance of patching. We'll stipulate that that's there. I guess the next step up for me is to have a SOC behind the endpoints, because most intrusions happen at the endpoint level, especially once there's UTM and patching in place. Most of them happen there because that's where you trick the users. I mean, that's the bottom line. And some people will argue that it's not a security thing, but make damn sure you've got real business continuity, disaster recovery, and snapshotting in place. You know, one of the reasons I love, we're a Datto shop, but I love the concept of BCDR is that a lot of us overlook the fact that we can also be the ones that take down the network.
Yeah.
Free tip for you guys. If you're ever trying to ask somebody what downtime would cost their business, you always phrase the question like this. If I were to go in there and do some work on the server and I took your business down for a day, what would that cost? Because you'll get a much bigger answer than what if you took your server down for, or what if it just happened? Once there's blame to be placed, they start thinking. But the real truth is if you have UTM, you have patching managed, and you have real EDR or MDR at the endpoints with a SOC behind it, and you have a safety net of that Datto or whatever product you use. Because remember, you can patch a server and take it down. That still happens. Those 4 things are enough that I would say that you're not going to be compliant by anybody's standards, but you're doing the minimum. I do want to mention one other thing really quick. Only I think Brent, for the most part, has commented, and I thank you, Brent, for being so positive. But I need somebody to question something I've said in our last couple of minutes. I want this. I mean, I'm going to have someday, I hope not soon, a funeral and a fine obituary, or a eulogy. But I also want to save time for a rebuttal. So let's have a rebuttal. Anybody out there disagree or have another idea about this?
While we're waiting for them to respond, let me ask you one more question. Are you backing up every endpoint as well, every workstation, or just the servers?
No, we are not. We've offered endpoint backup for mobile devices and almost never been taken up on it. But those devices are typically used tethered by RDS or RDP into a local device in the network. And we have enforced redirected folders everywhere, every time. Now, period. So does that really mean there's no local data? Not quite. But we also, every month people get a newsletter from us and a Your Eyes Only email from me. And every one of them reminds them of some basics about security, user training, and local data.
Well, we did not get anyone to come back and object, but JP just ran and said, hey, this was really great stuff. Thanks, Josh and George.
Well, thanks, JP.
Here we go. Brent says, we back up every endpoint. The time to put a workstation back in place justified. Do you agree with that?
It just depends on what your normal response is. So we can deploy a new machine in about an hour. So you have to look at that, your cost, whether you're charging for it or is it a pass-through cost to the end user, and what they're willing to pay for. But the real thing is, there are going to be some battles and some negotiations, some fights. You have to pick your fights. And I haven't identified endpoint backup as a fight worth having, but I certainly understand if people are successful doing that.
Wow, he said with data, we spent 32 minutes on a workstation. I hope that works across the board because they're not perfect, not targeting data specifically.
Did he mean RMM or
did bare metal restore or anything like that, right? There's always that one computer that never jives. Yeah. But no, 32 minutes is fantastic, by the way. That's fantastic. With data, he says. Okay. Well, this was awesome, by the way. I really love the view from the guy in the seat on the ground trying to make things happen. Slightly different than the guy trying to sell you stuff. All things considered, a lot of stuff there to chew, a lot of stuff there to consider. This was recorded, this whole session. I really suggest that you go back, rewind, and take the portions of it and work with your teams to figure out where your gaps are. You'll find the recording of this on mspinitiative.com under sessions. Keep coming back every Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 o'clock Eastern time. Even while we're on the road, we'll be doing these sessions. Maybe we'll even bring Josh back on a panel, and we'll give him some more voices on the other side to counter what he's saying, maybe. So we'll keep it interesting. But Josh, really appreciate you opening up the world from New Mexico and from where you sit. And everyone else, if you need to get a hold of Josh or have a question, he's super awesome. I'm sure he'll reply. Josh, where do they find you?
Probably easiest is just my primary email, Joshua@net. Wait, is this going live on Facebook?
Yes.
All right, let's go to info
Yeah,
at netsciences.com.
There you go.
Yeah, so I didn't quite finish my full email
There you
address.
go.
But
We're on LinkedIn. I'm sure he's on
that's
LinkedIn.
fine. Yeah, info
All
at
right.
netsciences.com.
info@netsciences.com. All right, guys. Appreciate everyone for jumping on. Have a great day. Stay groovy.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.